All right, so we're going to start off with a look at rule-governed behavior. And if you recall, we actually had one last thing to take care of in terms of observational learning, and that was the idea of what is going on with that bystander effect. So as we saw last time, you are less likely to actually receive assistance if there is a lot of people around you when you need help versus if there is only one person around you. So the greater number of bystanders, the less likely it is that any one of them, or even anyone in the group of them, is going to help. So the question is how can observational learning explain this? And just kind of jog your memory. Remember that we had some of those clues. So clue number one was that Peter, the actor in this demonstration, was not helped when he was dressed kind of in regular clothes, but he was helped immediately when he was dressed in a nice business suit. Remember that as soon as somebody helped the woman who was the Confederate, the actress, as soon as one person helped her, everybody else was a good Samaritan and started to help her as well. So why would a group help once one person helped? And then also remember that one of the people that helped initially was a construction worker, and he walked right up to the female Confederate who was pretending to need assistance, and he walked right up to her and said, "Are you all right? Do you need help?" So how can observational learning account for that? How can observational learning explain what is going on in the bystander effect? So any ideas? Mm-hmm. Okay, so one thing that they use to explain this is that everybody thinks that somebody else is going to do it, right? So everybody is like, well, I don't really want to get involved. Somebody else will do it. And that might be a way of explaining why nobody gets involved initially. But that cannot be what is driving this effect, because if it was true, then as soon as one person helped, everybody would look at that and say, you know what, somebody was going to help eventually. There they are, so I don't need to get involved. So if it was really the case that everybody around that area was thinking, I don't want to get involved, but somebody will help, somebody will do this, then as soon as one person helped this individual, they would just walk away, and you would only have one person helping this individual. However, as we saw, as soon as one person stopped to help, remember in this case, as soon as that first woman said, "Are you all right? Are you all right?" Then all of a sudden, everybody was a good Samaritan. Everybody joined in. So why would everybody join in after one person joined in? And remember that we're talking about observational learning. Mm-hmm.
Watching someone do it, I guess, I don't want to say acceptable, but they see someone do it, they're more likely to do it themselves.
Well, they're watching a model perform the behavior, right? They're watching a model perform the helping behavior. So as soon as they see somebody perform that helping behavior, through observational learning, they are much more likely to actually perform that behavior as well. So as soon as they see somebody walk up to the person and say, "Are you all right? Are you okay?" There's a bunch of people that will walk up and be like, "Yeah, are you okay? Are you all right? Like, I'm observing you doing the behavior. Now I'm going to do it myself." So not only are they more likely to perform the behavior, but what was the other aspect of observational learning? There's performance, and then there was acquisition. So not only does that person who's helping make it more likely that other observers will perform the behavior, it also helps with acquisition. And this is why, as soon as one person helps, everybody else starts helping. And this also explains why when nobody's helping, when nobody has helped this individual yet, people just continue to do nothing and walk on by. So I'll set this up with an analogy before we break it down. If you have ever gone to a fancy dinner party and you sit down and you haven't taken classes on etiquette and you haven't watched endless reruns of Downton Abbey, and you sit down to that table and there's like 18 place settings in front of you. You have like 5 different forks. You have 12 different spoons. You know, there's 6 different glasses. And somebody comes and they put a plate of salad in front of you. And you have no idea what to do. What's your go-to strategy? What are you going to do? You're going to watch somebody else. You are going to wait there very patiently, maybe make some small conversation, but you're going to wait there until you see somebody else pick up the 3rd fork and then start eating, and you're going to say to yourself, oh, okay, observational learning, I have now acquired the knowledge of how to do this. I'm also going to pick up that 3rd fork and I'm going to start eating. What's going to happen to that table if nobody has taken a course in etiquette? They're just going to sit there and nobody's going to pick up a fork. Exactly. So you're going to sit there and you're going to say, you know what, I don't know what to do. So I'm going to watch somebody else. And I'm not going to do anything until somebody else does something. And everybody else is sitting there looking at you and other people saying, I don't know what to do, but I'm going to watch somebody else. And as soon as they do something, I'm going to do something. So you have a whole bunch of people doing nothing, looking for somebody to do something, but nobody's going to do anything because nobody knows what to do. So that's one of the possible explanations for why people just walk on by. Because in some situations, it's confusing. In some situations, right, you can convince yourself that it's more confusing than it actually is. You can have a little bit of self-denial in this. But in some situations, it's confusing. And I'm sure we've seen people out and about in the world, and you're like, are they unconscious because they're hurt, or are they just taking a nap on that park bench? You know, are they laughing or are they crying, right? Should I help them or should I not help them? What's the correct move here, right? Because helping behavior is not something that a lot of people really know how to do. I've actually just skimmed the article, but they actually put out a study. They did a study where they found that if you need to support somebody emotionally, if somebody's going through a trying time, there's literally no right thing to say. And just being there is good enough. So, but people worry about it, right? You just lost, your mother just passed away. And you're like, I want to help them, but what do I say? Oh my gosh, what do I say? How do I do this? I don't want to get it wrong. Same thing here. Do I help the person? Do I not help the person? What's the right thing to do? If I disturb them, are they, I don't know what to do. So what do they do in that situation? Everybody starts looking around. Does he need help? Does he not need help? Is he taking a nap? Is something else? Did he just stub his toe? What's going on here? And everybody has that idea, and everybody's looking around. And notice that the 2 times that people got helped, first off, in this indication, it was a construction worker. And I guarantee you that construction worker, at some point in his career when he got on the job, he received on-the-job training. And they told him, if you see somebody lying down on the construction site, you walk up to them and you say, are you okay? You check them out. That's the training. So for him, there was no looking around. He wasn't confused. He said, oh, I see somebody. I'm going to do what I know. I'm going to do my training. Are you okay? Are you all right? Then all of a sudden everybody's like, oh, we're supposed to do that. That's what we're supposed to do. Observational learning here. Let's all help them. So it was the one person who was probably trained in what to do, who probably knew what to do, the construction worker, that he didn't even look around. He just walked straight up to the person and said, are you all right? Are you doing okay? And the other time that somebody got helped was when he was dressed in a very nice suit. And oftentimes I hear interpretations of psychology, interpretations of humans that is incredibly cynical, interpretations that are incredibly mean-spirited. And I know that that sells clicks and it sells, newspapers. But we also, I think, as psychologists, need to look for the light in humanity. I don't want to get too new agey on this, but humans are not as bad as we point them out to be. And I thought it was very cynical that the reporters were like, well, now he's rich. And of course, if he's rich, we're going to help him because rich people, we're all shallow and we're all materialistic, and a rich person is going to get helped immediately. Notice what they ignored is that it is obvious that he needs help. Because remember what that one businessman said. He goes, clearly he needed help because it was raining and he was going to ruin his very nice suit. So for most people, when they looked at him, it wasn't the case, and again, this is what the report made it sound like, it wasn't the case that they came by this guy and they said, he's got no money, I'm just going to walk on by. Versus this guy going, ooh, a rich person, let me go up there and help him immediately. No, they looked at this individual and they said, I'm not entirely sure what's going on here. Does he need help or does he not need help? But they looked at this individual and said, he needs help because there's no way that he's taking a nap in a suit that expensive. It's raining. Clearly, something has gone wrong here. So again, no necessity for observational learning. For all of these people that were passing by this individual, they didn't have to look around and say, does he need help? What do other people think? What are other people doing? They took one look at his suit and said, yeah, he needs help because that's an expensive suit and he's ruining it. And there's no reason he would do that unless he needed assistance. All right, so any final questions about the bystander effect and observational learning's potential explanation? Mm-hmm.
So the guy who didn't look rich.
Yep.
You're saying that like people didn't know if he needed help or not, but I remember that he was like literally saying help me.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I did mention that there was room for self-denial, right? So whether or not they knew that he needed help, whether or not they knew how to help him, those are all different aspects that would contribute to help, right? So I've heard the one thing I know about motorcycle crashes, if you come across somebody in a motorcycle crash, do not take their helmet off. And the reason you don't take their helmet off is because they might have injured their neck. And if you try to take the helmet off their head, there's a chance that you might injure their neck even further, snap some nerves, and make them paralyzed. That's the one thing that I know about motorcycle accidents, is you don't take off the helmet. I would not know what to do anything else. So outside of being in that group and saying, don't take off the helmet, don't take off the helmet, I wouldn't know how to do anything else. So in this case, it could have been a combination of a number of different factors. But clearly, they were able to convince themselves that they don't really know whether he needed help or not. And part of that might be because they didn't know what to do. And again, it was telling that as soon as that construction worker came along, who clearly has had some training, he walked right up and said, are you okay? And there was no room for being able to convince yourself otherwise, right, that the person did not need help. So it's kind of like, I mean, it's a little bit hard to believe that you can convince yourself that much that somebody says, oh, help me, doesn't need your help. But I guess they were able to do that to an extent that they were, that they didn't take action in this case. But that's a good point, and this area of the bystander effect, if you look it up, there's literally thousands of studies being done on this, trying to pinpoint exactly what is occurring in this kind of really bizarre psychological phenomenon. But observational learning has to play a major role in it, considering the fact that once somebody starts helping, an entire group of people, come on in to help them. Any other questions, comments? All right. So now we're going to turn to rule-governed behavior and wrap up our look at observational learning and rule-governed behavior. So we've all heard of rules before, but rules in terms of the psychology of learning is very precisely defined. It's a verbal description of a contingency. It is a way of telling somebody that in a certain situation, if you perform a certain behavior, then this consequence will follow. So sometimes it's good. In a workplace, if you complete this widget, then you will earn $5. Or it could be something, it could be punishment. In this situation, if you don't stop at a school bus stop sign when they're dropping off the kids, then you will, lose points, be fined, potentially sent to jail. So we've seen verbal descriptions of contingencies, and this is the first, just as a sort of an aside, this is one of the first kinds of learning that we've seen that is specific to humans. So rules are verbal descriptions of contingencies, and you cannot tell a rat what the rule is, right? You cannot verbally go to a rat. You probably wish you could on some of your Sniffy assignments, but you can't go to Sniffy and say, if you press this bar, I will give you this food, right? So here's the rule. But we have seen it in other cases with human learning. So there was a lot of rules being used when Dr. Fox was treating Harry. So Dr. Fox would say things like, if you don't take those restraints off, we're leaving with your restraints, and we're going to go for 5 minutes. He was told, if you don't get your hands out of your pockets, right, if you do not do this behavior, then the consequence is that we're going to leave. If you don't throw the ball to Bill, or if you don't catch the ball, we're leaving with your restraints. So all of these are rules. All of these are descriptions of contingencies. If you get in my face, I'm going to get in your face. If you get in my face, I'm going to get in your face. So these were all rules that helped the treatment of Harry that had advantages in terms of changing his behavior. So we got these verbal descriptions of a contingency, as you can see, used by Dr. Fox in the treatment of Harry. So what are some of the advantages of using these verbal descriptions? Well, the first example, or the first advantage, is that using a rule, a verbal description of a contingency, can give you a rapid establishment of the appropriate patterns of behavior. So Harry very, very quickly learned that if he self-abused, the restraints were going to leave. You do not need verbal descriptions to establish appropriate patterns of behavior, because once again, we can use operant conditioning and to teach animals to do certain patterns of behavior, but it takes a long time. So I have been on both sides of this. I have done research on human subjects, which is where my current research lies, and I have done research on animal subjects. I've done an inhibition of return study on pigeons along with some other research when I was doing my master's. And in terms of the time spent with human subjects, typically in an experiment, 10% of the time in human subjects is spent establishing the contingencies. And that occurs when I tell the subjects what the rules of the experiment are. So that 10% of the time is when I say, you're going to be looking at these pictures, and on a scale of 1 to 10, how good is each picture? A picture of a person running to the right, and you just rate it on a scale of 1 to 10. Off you go. There's the rules. The other 90% of the time is the actual running of the experiment. For animal experiments, that time is pretty much flipped. So for an animal experiment, 75% of the time is spent training. So when I did my inhibition of return studies, 75% of the time was training the pigeons to peck at a screen. And then also training them to peck at a star, but don't peck at a circle. Training them to peck in a one of six quadrant areas. Training them to fixate, and not look around. That was 75% of the experimental time. 25% was spent actually running them on the experiment. So one of the advantages of rule-governed behavior is that it rapidly establishes the appropriate pattern of behaviors. And this is why we use rule-governed behaviors in our society. Because if nobody told you how to act in society, if nobody told you how to behave in society, you would eventually learn how to behave in society. Now, you might spend 30 years in jail before you figure it out, right? But you would eventually learn. Or you can just have your parents tell you, stealing is wrong, and we do not murder people, right? You can have them give you the rules. It very rapidly establishes those appropriate behaviors. So that is the main advantage. You can very quickly bring a human who understands language up to speed, give them the appropriate patterns of behavior. So just if you ever travel to a foreign country, just that little pamphlet that you can pick up at the airport that says, here's some of the customs of our society, that gives you those rules with the contingencies that helps you establish those appropriate patterns of behavior. So that's the main advantage. However, there are disadvantages. So there are things to be aware of when you're dealing with rule-governed behavior. And the first one is that rule-governed behavior is often less efficient than behavior that has actually been shaped by direct natural contingencies. And this is nowhere better seen than somebody who has actually practiced something versus somebody who has read about something. So if you're going to go out and play baseball, who are you going to want on your team if you want to win? Are you going to want the person who has played baseball for 10 years? Or are you going to want the person who has read books about baseball for 10 years? Both of them will know the contingencies, right? Both of them will know the behaviors that are to be performed. But the one who has actually played for 10 years, when they've thrown that ball right, they've got reinforced with either an out or a strike. When they've thrown that ball wrong, they've gotten punished by either a wild pitch or, the ball is, there's an error on the play, somebody scores a run. The person and their behavior because of that is going to be much more efficient. It's going to be much more, the performance is going to be higher. The person who read about it might know the rule book inside and out. They might know every single thing to do. But when it comes time for them to throw that ball, they are going to be very poor at throwing that ball. And it's not going to be very hard. It's probably not going to go where it's supposed to go. When they swing that bat, they'll hold it correctly, but they're not going to swing it right. Or they'll be the ones who are like, all right, pitch the ball. And they roll the ball, and they're like, okay, transfer the weight, cock the hips, swing. And it's like, yeah, you've already struck out. Like, you haven't even swung the bat yet. So rules are less efficient at actually shaping the behavior than direct natural contingencies. So rules are better at acquisition. So remember that difference between acquiring the behavior versus performing the behavior. Rules are actually better at acquisition. And if you ever do want to improve your behavior in a particular sport, for example, one of the best things you can do is to find a coach who will give you the rules, who will say, this is what you do in this case, this is what you do in this case, these are the rules that you can use. And that's great at acquisition, but actual natural contingencies are better at honing that performance. They're better at shaping your performance, shaping that behavior. So that's one disadvantage of rule-governed behavior. The other one, and this one is seen very much so today. This is due to our changing culture. This is one of the biggest disadvantages of rule-governed behavior. And it's the fact that rules are often insensitive to the actual contingencies in that particular setting. So a rule again is a verbal description of a contingency, and oftentimes that description is inaccurate. That description is wrong. So if you've ever seen portrayals of corporate life back in like the 60s, so if there's any fans of Mad Men around here who took a look at that workplace, there were some very well-defined rules, right? So rule number one, if you go into somebody's office, pour yourself a scotch and start drinking it. The consequence, if you go into somebody's office and you pour a drink, you're going to be given time to pitch your idea. If you go into somebody's office and you don't pour a drink, they're going to think you're a communist, right? That was what happened back in the 60s. If your secretary, The rule back then, if your secretary does a good, does a good job, pat her on the bum, and she'll do she'll continue to work well for you. That was the rule back then. If I worked here and my work was influenced by Don Draper, if I went to Don Draper as a young man and I said, you know what, I'm going to start working at a university, what should I do? And Don Draper said, here's the rules that I know. If you go to somebody's office, as soon as you get there, pour yourself a drink and start drinking it. Have a bar in your office because you will be rewarded for having a bar in your office. And when your secretary, Christy, does a good job, give her a little tap on the behind. Let her know that her work is appreciated. I would end up in HR so fast if I tried any of those because those rules are insensitive to the actual contingencies that are here. So sometimes the rules that are given do not match the actual contingencies that are in the real world. Now, this is a bit of an exaggerated example of this, but we are seeing this more and more and more happen in our society as the rules of our society change. So one of the big examples of these insensitivities of the rules to the actual contingencies occurred, I think it's been just over a year now with the Me Too movement. So Weinstein here, if you don't know who he is, you should. He was basically the original harasser, the original sexual predator that got called out by Rose McGowan that started the entire Me Too movement. And he was under a rule. So he operated for years under a particular rule, under a particular verbal description of a contingency, under a particular, in a certain setting, if you perform a certain behavior, then a certain consequence will follow. And the rule that he was working under was in Hollywood, if you sexually harass or sexually abuse, your actresses, then you will get sexual gratification. That was the rule. Notice there's no punishment consequence, right? This is a rule describing reinforcement. So if in Hollywood, if you sexually harass, then you will get gratification. And that was the second rule, was that in Hollywood, if you sexually harass, then nothing will happen. So these were the rules that he was operating under. And these were the rules that were true for a long time. Rose McGowan came along, and she was also operating under a particular rule. And the rule that she was operating under for a while was that in Hollywood, if you accuse a powerful person, then your career will be destroyed. So Harvey Weinstein had the power to basically blacklist an actor or an actress that went against him, and their career would just nosedive in Hollywood. So this was the rule that she was working under for a while. She was also working under the rule that in Hollywood, if you accuse a powerful person, then you are actually going to be blamed. So it was the rule that if you came out and you said, this person sexually harassed me, that it would come back against you and they would say, no, you tried to seduce me, you wanted to have sex with me so that I would put you in my movie, and now because I didn't, now you're coming against me, or you're a gold digger and you just want to get me in trouble so you'll get money, you're trying to blackmail me. That was the rule that everybody was under. So that rule caused a certain amount of behavior to occur. However, that rule changed. And the contingencies are now different. The natural contingencies are now different. So the new rule is that if in Hollywood, if you accuse a powerful person, this was the old rule. If you accuse a powerful person, then no one will believe you. Those were the old rules. Clearly, those rules have changed. Clearly, those contingencies are no longer in place, because now when somebody comes forward and says, this person has sexually harassed me, even before investigations are done, even before corroborating evidence comes out, that person is taken a look at by their company, they're put on suspension, they're removed from certain projects. These accusations are now taken seriously. The Weinstein case is moving to trial. The Cosby case has already resulted in a conviction. So these rules have changed. And again, the the rules that people were operating under were no longer true of the natural contingencies. And that's why as soon as Rose McGowan came out and people started believing her, everybody else that was operating under those old rules, everybody else that said, you know what, I can't say anything. I'm not going to accuse Weinstein. I'm not going to accuse Spacey or Asia Argentino or any of these abusers. I'm not going to accuse them because nobody's going to believe me. That's the rule we're living under. Rose McGowan came along and said, well, look, it's not. The natural contingency now is that people will believe you. And that's why everybody started coming out afterwards, because they realized that their verbal description of that contingency was no longer correct. It might have been correct in the 90s. It might have been correct in the early 2000s. But ever since Rose McGowan came out, it's no longer correct. So then these new rules the new contingencies developed and the rules caught up. And that's why we see so many people coming out and being believed these days. All right. Any questions on just the idea of rule-governed behavior and the advantages and disadvantages? All right. So the last thing we're going to take a look at in terms of rules is personal rules and self-regulation. And this is a nice application of the idea of rules because you can actually use what you've learned here to change behaviors in yourself that you want to change. So we all have bad behaviors. We all have bad habits. We also all have good habits that we want to increase in those behaviors. So this is a way to use rules, but use them in terms of personal rules for self-regulation. So a personal rule is, it's a verbal description of a contingency, but it's one that you present to yourself to influence your own behavior. So it's one that you say to yourself where you're like, if I do this, then this is the contingency that's going to follow. If I do this, then this is the consequence that's going to follow. And they found that the most effective versions of these personal rules, if you want to use them to actually change your own behavior, the most effective way to do it is to come up with personal process rules. So this is actually really appropriate considering that we're entering the holiday season and December 31st is coming up, and a lot of you are going to make personal rules for yourself on December 31st. They're typically called New Year's resolutions. So if you want to make that resolution stick, if you want to make that change, what you don't want to do is use just a regular personal rule. So let's say that your goal in the new year is to increase your level of activity, increase your level of fitness. A personal rule, a verbal contingency, would be something like, if I go to the gym and I get fit, then I will buy myself that new wardrobe, right? So if I go to the gym and get fit, then I will buy that new wardrobe. That's my contingency. That's my personal rule. That's my verbal description of a contingency. It is a verbal description of a contingency. If I do this behavior, I will reinforce myself, with a new wardrobe. But the problem is that it is not an effective way of stating that rule because it's not a personal process rule. So if you want to be effective in changing your behavior, you want to come up with personal process rules. And these are special rules that specify when, where, and how a goal is to be accomplished. So rather than saying, I'm going to go to the gym and I'm going to get fit, you want to say things like, I'm going to go to the gym Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays. And I am going to go to the Planet Fitness that is 2 blocks from my house. And in terms of getting fit, I am going to define that as, decreasing my body fat index to a certain amount, or being able to run a half marathon, or some other measurable outcome. So you need to specify, in order for these personal rules to be effective, you need to specify when, where, and how that goal is to be accomplished. And it needs to be defined with what are known as bright boundaries. And a bright boundary is a boundary that when you've crossed it, and you know when you have not crossed it. So a non-bright boundary would be, I'm going to go to the gym. You have no idea, or I'm going to go to the gym more. Let's be a little bit more clear on this. In the new year, I'm going to go to the gym more. What is going to the gym more? How do you know when you have accomplished going to the gym more? Or in the new year, I'm going to go to the gym often. Well, what's often? When have you accomplished often? Not a bright boundary. But if you say, I'm going to go to the gym every week, Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays, then you know exactly when you've crossed that boundary. Because if you've gone to the gym Monday and Wednesday and Friday, you've crossed that boundary. But if you don't go on Wednesday, you haven't crossed that boundary. So it's very clear to see where it is. Things like, I'm going to define fitness as being able to complete a half marathon. You will know when you will literally cross that bright boundary. You'll literally cross that tape when you finish that half marathon, and you'll know that you've done it. So there's no things like, I'm going to work out until I get fit. What is fit? When have you gotten fit? I'm going to work out until I look better in clothes. What does that even mean? When have you accomplished it? So if you want to use personal rules and self-regulation, remember the personal process rule. When, where, and how are you going to accomplish that rule? And remember those bright boundaries. Pick the when, wheres, and hows where it's exceptionally clear, it's measurable when you've accomplished it versus when you haven't accomplished that. So that's the idea of the personal process rule. So again, New Year's resolution time is swiftly upon us. So if you want to use that, or if you want to make a New Year's resolution, give it a shot. Try that personal process rule. Use those bright boundaries, and see if you can be effective in that self-regulation. All right, and the last thing we're going to talk about is how do these personal rules even work? So it's kind of a weird thing to think that it's effective to give yourself your own rules because you are basically the judge, jury, and executioner when it's on yourself. So how is it effective where you're saying, you know what, I'm going to do this and I'm going to follow this rule when you yourself have the power to say, you know what, I've changed my mind. I don't want to follow that rule anymore. So how is it that these personal rules even exert any influence on your behavior when you are both the maker and the potential breaker of the rule? Well, psychologists have discovered that it has to do with this characteristic that we all have, which is known as our say-do correspondence. So a say-do correspondence, you can think of it as a feature that everybody has. Some people have more of it than others. Some people have less of it. And say-do correspondence is high when we do what we say we will do. So if you have somebody that is reliable, if you have somebody and you say, you know what, I need your help this Friday, can you help me out? And they're like, yes, and on Friday they're there and they're helping you out. If you have somebody who says, you know what, I got to study this weekend for this upcoming exam, so I can't go, on the trip. And when the trip comes, they're not there. And when you FaceTime them, they're studying and they're like, sorry, I got to study, hang up. Those people have very high say-do correspondence. They do what they say they will do. People can also other people will have low say-do correspondence. This is when they fail to do what they say they will do. And we as individuals and as a society, we value the high say-do correspondence in others and in ourselves. And we do not value the low say-do correspondence. So I have heard many people, if you're like, well, tell me about your friend Jim. What makes him so great? And they'll say stuff like, well, Jim, he's always been there for me whenever I've needed him. If I was in trouble, I'd just call him up. He'd be there. If I asked him to do something, he would do something for me. He's very reliable. He's a great friend because, I know I can count on him. What a great guy, Jim. That's typically what you hear. You never hear somebody say, tell me about your friend Jeff. And they'll be like, oh, man, Jeff, Gotta tell you, he's a great guy. Jeff is a flake. I mean, if he tells you he's gonna be there, he is not gonna be there. And I remember one time I told him, dude, we're having a barbecue. Can you bring the meat? And he said, yeah, I can bring the meat. And he did not come to the barbecue. It was a disaster. Man, I love Jeff. No, you don't. You hate Jeff, right? Jeff does not have what we value, which is that high say-do correspondence. So high say-do correspondence is a feature of us and a feature of other people that we value. We like to both see high say-do correspondence in others and to possess high say-do correspondence in ourselves. And this is related to willpower and related to the effectiveness of these personal process rules, because your say-do correspondence operates as a commitment response. So if you remember the idea of the commitment response, putting something on the line, where if you fail to do what you said you were going to do, that you will forfeit that commitment. What people do in personal process rules is they will put their say-do correspondence on the line. So an example of this, an example of a failure in somebody who has a low say-do correspondence or low value for say-do correspondence comes from Brooklyn Nine-Nine. And if you're a fan of this show and are happy that it recently got saved from being canceled, you'll know about Gina and Terry and Santiago. What's her first name? It was called by last names. No, what's her name? Anybody know? All right. Well, anyway, this is about Gina. All right, so in this particular scene, they were all deciding that they were going to clean up their diets. So they were going to go and start this new diet. It was one of those ones where the food is prepared for you, it's delivered to your home, you're on a meal plan, and this was going to make them healthy, make them full of energy. And this was their lunch, and they were all sitting around, and basically they were like, you know what, I'm loving this diet. Like, I find it so great. Sometimes I can't even finish the cashews. Like, it's just, it's too filling. So they're all sitting around there, and it's day 4. And Terry goes, all right, gang, diet day 4, how's everybody holding up? And Gina says, honestly, I'm going to last forever. You hear that, bees? I'm going to last forever. That same day, she has her Subway with the Cheetos and the chili all stuck on it. And Terry goes, what happened? I thought you were going to last forever, bees. And she goes, turns out I gave up easy. You hear that, bees? I gave up so easy. So she put her say-do correspondence on the line. She said, you know what? I'm going to last forever. I am going to be that. This diet is not going to get me. I'm going to last forever. But then when it finally came time to last forever, she said, you know what? I couldn't care less. I couldn't care less if you don't think that I'm reliable. And did you hear that? I'm unreliable, right? She's just that kind of a person. She does not care what other people think of her. So for her say-do correspondence is not worth very much. What other people think of her in terms of her reliability, she doesn't really care. So when you take a look at that Ainslie-Rachlin model of self-control, this larger later reward, this is sticking to the diet. This is getting healthy, removing all the sort of impurities out of your body. This smaller sooner reward, that's the hoagie that she was eating with the Cheetos and the chili. When she said that she was going to last forever, that she could, this diet wasn't going to beat her, she was going to last forever, what she was doing was she was putting her say-do correspondence on the line. She was putting that characteristic of herself on the line. She was committing that to this diet. And what she thought would occur was that smaller sooner reward, that hoagie reward, the value of it minus the value that she puts on her say-do correspondence would take the reward and put it below the larger later reward. So that when it came time to eat that hoagie, she would be sitting there going, you know what, I really want that sandwich, but I don't want Terry to think that I'm unreliable, and I actually value being reliable and thinking that of myself. So no sandwich for me, because other people's opinion means too much to me. She's a rebel. She lives her own life. She doesn't care what other people think. And what that means is that commitment wasn't enough. it was not enough to bring that smaller, sooner reward below the value of the larger, later reward. So when she was passing by that deli and she saw that hoagie and she saw that chili and Cheetos, and she said, you know what, I'm going to get that because my say-do correspondence is not worth that much to me, so I'd rather have the sandwich and I'll forfeit my say-do correspondence. So that's an example of it failing. Let's take an example of it working. So your textbook mentions this one, but it's so extreme that I thought it'd be important. Gandhi. Gandhi, just give you a little bit of background on the situation in case you forgot. Gandhi vowed to be sexually abstinent while he was married. All right, so this is his vow that he made. I'm not going to question why, but he made this vow. He wanted to remain sexually abstinent. In that case, this larger later reward is whatever reward he was going to get for remaining sexually abstinent. He had his reasons. This smaller sooner reward is sex with his wife, right? So this would be when his wife is in the mood and he's in the mood, do you cash in that smaller sooner reward? So Gandhi, knowing himself, knew that if he was in the mood for that smaller sooner reward, right then, he was in the mood, and his wife came in and she was like, hey Gandhi, it's a Law and Order rerun. You want to, I don't know if they watch Law and Order, anyway. But anyways, if his wife was in the mood, he knew that he would cash in that smaller sooner reward. He just knew it. So what he did was he made this commitment. He vowed to be sexually abstinent. And when you're the leader of a revolution, when you're the leader of a movement, and your followers believe you because your integrity is high, when you say things like nonviolent forms of protest are the way that we should do things, and people have no reason to believe you other than looking at you and saying, you know what, he's got a lot of say-do correspondence, he's a man of integrity, I'm going to listen to what he says. When you're a leader in that position, your say-do correspondence is huge. So when he put that on the line, it took that smaller sooner reward and it dropped it, because sex with his wife also now includes loss of his say-do correspondence, which means loss of his influence as a leader, which means loss of something that is very, very valuable to him. And he was able to stay abstinent, I think it was like 20 years or something, based on the value of his say-do correspondence. All right, so if you're going to be using, again, this say-do correspondence to enhance your personal process rules, come January 1st, make sure that if you're using that say-do correspondence, take a look at yourself inside and ask yourself, is that something that is really valuable to me? So is your word your bond? Are you one of those people where it's like, look, my word is my bond. If I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do something. I am highly reliable. If it is, put your say-do correspondence on the line. You'll have a good chance of increasing that behavior. If it's not, right, and not everybody is reliable. That's why people that are very reliable are highly valued. If it's not, choose something else, because your say-do correspondence, if it can't drop that smaller sooner reward low enough, it's not going to be effective in terms of changing your behavior. All right, so that's it for rule governed behavior. Any final questions on that? We good? All right. So what we're going to do now is we are going to continue on. It was a bit of a catch-up class today, but we're going to continue on, and now we're going to take a look at Chapter 12, which is Biological Dispositions in Learning. So these next two classes are going to be about just the weird biologically programmed hiccups or weirdness that occurs in humans and animals that affect their learning. So again, these are just like weird little things that are specific to different organisms that can affect how they learn. So today we're going to take a look at preparedness and conditioning, specifically as it has to do with taste aversion. We're going to take a look at operant-respondent interactions. So we're going to take a look at the phenomenon of sign tracking, and we're going to use that to answer the question of why do romantic dates always include this particular thing. So 99% of romantic dates include one activity. And can anybody identify what that one activity is? What was that? Eating. Yes. Just about every single date that you ever will go on will involve some sort of food. So it's always dinner and a movie, dinner and a concert. Do you want to go to the beach and have a picnic? Do you want to, go to this thing and we'll get some food? So why is food always there? It's a fun thing to do, but so are other things. So why is eating always there? We're going to take a look at a possible theory, and it has to do with sign tracking. And we're going to use these two very typical biological dispositions to try to explain OS. And we're going to see a video right now that explains what OS is. But just to kind of introduce this, it's going to be a case study on a woman whose name is Erica, and she is a highly successful architect, I believe. She was also a championship level archer. She competed in jiu-jitsu, I believe, as well. So she is highly accomplished, highly intelligent, highly well-spoken, very emotionally stable, but she is part of the OS community. So we're going to take a look right now at what that community is and what behaviors it entails, and then we're going to see how those pretty unique or rare behaviors could possibly be explained by sign tracking and preparedness. All right, so here's the story of Erica. We'll see it in a few different scenarios.
This video has been classified by the ABC as PG.
Most of us think we know what love is. However, there is a small group of less than 200 people worldwide who feel genuine love for inanimate objects. They are known as objectum sexuals. Erica Eiffel is one of the few brave enough to publicly out themselves as being OS. She spoke to us from her home in Berlin.
What was the first object you can remember falling in love with?
The first object I ever loved was a bridge in my hometown. A very lovely bridge on the Sandy River, and I really didn't even think it was unusual, really, until I was a teenager. That's when the boys and girls at school started really dating, and, I kind of saw that, well, okay, I'm more interested in this bridge, and they're more interested in each other. This is maybe a little different. I didn't quite realize it was love until the bridge was destroyed in a flood. I was emotionally distraught. It's like, you lost a...
Whoops. Sorry, that wasn't supposed to be a click. All right. I wanted to pause this for a moment.
Interested in this bridge, and they're more interested in each other. This is maybe a little different. I didn't quite realize it was love until the bridge was destroyed.
Okay, so a couple of things to just to make sure we're all on the same page. Number one, she is what is known as an objectum sexual. She loves inanimate objects the same way that other people love humans. So she forms these deep attachments. You'll see a little bit more details about it. And one of the sort of interesting things about her situation is, number one, how highly functioning she is. So this isn't some sort of mental deficit. This isn't some sort of, aberration. Well, this isn't some sort of mental defect that is causing this behavior. People like her are the reason that the plus is added to the LGBTQIA plus community, is to cover instances like this that aren't being added to the anagram. But the other thing about it is, as she tells her story, notice how absolutely normal her experiences are, except that she is falling in love with inanimate objects. So her path that she went through, her experiences that she went through, mirror and are almost exactly the same as any other individual that has come out to his family and friends or her family and friends with something, some other sexual orientation than heterosexuality. So it's amazing that it's so bizarre, and yet at the same time, it is so typical of what occurs.
I mean, I was emotionally distraught. I mean, it's like, you lost a best friend, and this bridge was a true friend to me. And that's kind of the way I saw it. I saw the life of the object as valuable as that of, a person, a friend.
Over time, Erica's bond with objects has grown to include fences, iron structures, and even her archery bow, which she named Lance. Her current loves are more famous. They include the Berlin Wall and the Eiffel Tower. In 2008, Erica confirmed her commitment to objects and to being an OS person in a small ceremony marrying the tower.
When you had your commitment ceremony, what were people's reactions? Did you have guests?
Yeah, I had several people there at my commitment ceremony, and they were very happy for me because they saw that I was legitimately happy. So from happiness breeds more happiness.
How can you be in a relationship that's something that can't return your feelings?
Well, see, that's exactly it. You're implying that what I need out of a relationship is the same as what everyone else needs. You're implying that I need my object to talk to me. I need my object to...
Oh my gosh. Sorry. Oh, this is going wonderfully. All right. Sorry about that. Somebody tried to call me.
To find and reach higher levels. I've become a 3-time world champion, broke numerous. What I get out of this relationship is much more to me. But I mean, my objects have really propelled me to find and reach higher levels. I've become a 3-time world champion, broke numerous records. It's propelled me in all directions of my life, including work. I think that people need to look at our relationships a little bit more serious and not so much that it's just like a sexual connection, because it's not about that. In fact, many people in the OS community are not sexual, and certainly not sexual by the same standards that humans apply. But I'm not exactly going to tell people how I do it, because if I share my intimacy with the entire world, I basically lessen the value.
Feel free to.
All right. So once again, just really quickly, notice how regular or typical her experience is. So she had multiple love interests while she was growing up, just like everybody else. Boyfriends and girlfriends come and go. She found one that she decided to commit to, right? The Eiffel Tower. She had her commitment ceremony. She invited her friends, to come see her there. The part I love about it, what she mentioned, is that her relationship with objects makes her better, right? So her relationship with objects kind of push her towards being better, push her towards being, a better person. And if you ever find a significant other that does that for you, hang on to them, because that is the kind of relationship you want, right? You don't want the relationships where they pull you down and you're like, hey, I have this great job opportunity. And they're like, well, you're not going to be spending all the time with me, so I'm going to guilt trip you. And then you're like, oh, no, I can't do it. Don't choose that. But notice, her relationships make her better, right? They fulfill that kind of need that we all have, to have somebody that supports us and lifts us up, but it's just an object. And notice also that much like anybody who is not heterosexual, when you come out about your relationship, the sexual question comes up immediately. So if you're heterosexual, you can talk about your relationship, and nobody is ever going to ask you, unless they're really close friends with you, how does it work when you're let's use medical terms. When you're taking your penis and you have that vagina over there, what do you do exactly? How do you do? That never comes up. But even in this brief little interview, how she has sex comes up. And again, she's going to mention, look, just the way that normal people wouldn't talk about, heterosexual people wouldn't talk about it. I don't really want to talk about that either.
One question. Did you lose your virginity with an object?
Have I lost my... I want to answer the question, but I don't want to just give this debased answer, you know? I have intimate relationships with my object loves. Yes. If that's considered losing virginity, then yes, I've lost my virginity to an object.
How do you communicate?
To me, communication has a lot to do with like a feeling of energy transfer. It's like, for example, I'll put it really simple. If you walk up to a cold concrete wall and put your warm hand on the wall, you're going to feel the heat being drawn from your body, and you're going to feel the cold from the concrete coming into yours as you establish an equilibrium. And to me, these exchanges of energy are actually, really important. I kind of pick up vibrations and stuff.
Do you think it might be some type of mental disorder?
You know what? I can't say yes or no. I mean, as far as, when you say disorder, that implies some negative connotation there. If it was a mental disorder, I don't think that I would have done the things I've done in my life.
I guess what I'm getting at is, how do you know that you're not simply projecting onto an object?
Oh, clearly, because if I could just project feelings into objects, then I think everyone would be doing it. If it was that easy,
Okay, so one other kind of very typical thing, this projecting of feelings onto objects, this projecting of emotions onto something else. When she says, well, I think if you could do that, I think everybody would do that. Everybody does do that. So everybody's had this experience where you're listening to somebody who's in a relationship that they shouldn't be in, and they're telling you, they're like, oh, you don't get it. They're actually very kind. They actually do treat me well. They're very sweet. Once you get past the rough exterior and you get to the inside, they've got a good heart. And you look at them and you say, you are projecting all over the situation. Like, you are just seeing what you want to see. Maybe she is. But again, notice, it's not something that's atypical. How many of us have fooled ourselves into seeing something that really wasn't there? It's just a normal aspect of many relationships.
Would be making these idealistic relationships. I'm not just a freak of nature. There are others like me. And this became my quest after this, to go around and meet all the members in the OS community. I used up my entire life savings doing this, to meet everyone.
How does being OS affect your relationships with other people?
Surprisingly, when I came out, my friends were like, finally, we knew already that you were this way. We didn't.
And, oh man,
most of
sorry. I'm having a rough time. And again, how typical is that, right? How typical is amongst a group of friends that people know and just not bring it up. And when the person finally comes out, they're like, yes, well, of course, we've known for years, right? We were just waiting for you to say it. Again, it's not an atypical type of situation.
You were this way. We didn't have a name to call it, but we knew you were already. We're really glad to see that you're identifying and stepping out. So it's actually made my friendships better. Only one friend walked away and said, no, can't do this. It's just a little bit too, on the fringe for me.
Again, very typical. Most of her friends were like, yeah. One friend was like, can't do it.
Checkpoints across Berlin have finally buckled.
For Erica, one of her more contentious loves is the Berlin Wall, an object with which she has a deep affinity. Despite this, she grappled with her feelings because of what the wall once represented.
I just kept trying to push this aside, but I couldn't. And I just have to tell people, it's not the purpose of the wall. It's not the politics. It's the suffering, that the wall went through. If you look at it strictly that way, the wall was misplaced in the world.
All right. And once again, how typical is that? Not only did she fall for the bad boy, right? Not only did she fall for the Berlin Wall, but notice what she said about the Berlin Wall. It's not the wall's fault. It's just misunderstood. He's in the wrong place. He's in the wrong situation. If the wall was given all the opportunities that other walls got, wouldn't have been such a bad wall. You just don't understand the wall the way that I understand the wall. Not a bad wall. I noticed that she also had that. She knew it was wrong, right? She was like, oh, I was fighting with my feelings. You know, I was looking at this wall saying, you're no good for me, wall. But at the same time, ooh, there's something there, wall. And it's typical, right? It's very just kind of typical. The only thing that's weird about it or unusual is that it's an inanimate object.
Everyone hated this wall and could not accept its existence. Well, I felt that way in my life, being an OS person, misplaced in a community, a society of people who are all in love with each other.
The wall gets her.
For me, I couldn't stop those natural feelings. I couldn't stop the way that I felt, just as much as the Berlin Wall could grow legs and walk away from the city of Berlin and let the people reunite. This is such a 180 from what I'm used to. I'm used to being ashamed of what I am, and I shouldn't be, because A, I'm not hurting anyone by loving an object. B, I'm not hurting myself by loving an object. And C, I'm happy. I really am very, very happy.
All right, so that is Erica Eiffel, and we are going to, there's 2 more videos, but I'm going to leave those for you to watch as at home. So the links are in the PowerPoint files. Yes, they are the Tyra Banks Show, Tyra After Dark, highly insightful. And I just very quickly want to play one of them to just kind of give you this one insight, because we're going to be talking about this when we talk about biological dispositions.
The only romantic relationships that she's had in her life have been with objects. She's something called an objectum sexual. She literally fell so in love with the Eiffel Tower in Paris that she had a wedding and committed to the tower for life. And I understand you have a tattoo?
I do. Yeah, in fact, not a conventional wedding, you would have a ring, but for the Eiffel Tower night, it's a tattoo on my chest.
Oh my gosh, you guys see the tattoo on her chest? Like in between her chest? Okay. This is a representation of...
Actually, I'm actually polyamorous, so I love more than one object.
All right, so it's a little bit later in the video, so go right here.
I couldn't tell which toe.
So they have a sexologist that they have brought, a psychologist that specifically studies sexual behavior, to offer insight into what might be the cause, what might be going on here with Erica Eiffel. Where's my play button? Let's try that.
Yeah,
there we go.
Okay. With us is sexologist Dr. Amy Marsh. So, Dr. Amy, when I first heard Erica's story, I thought that it was that she was joking. I thought she was doing this to get a lot of publicity. I almost didn't want her on the show. And then my producers were explaining to me that this is something that's real. Can you explain exactly what objectum sexuality is?
It is very real. It's rare, but it's definitely real, and it's. Imagine, we all were children once, and maybe we had great parents and lots of friends, but we still had a wonderful toy or a blanket or something.
Oh, like a blankie, how kids go crazy for their blankie.
Yeah. Now, think of those feelings as a grown-up, and if you're wired to continue to respond to objects, then it will feel very natural to you. And the research I've done into this group really shows that they feel very natural and happy about this.
Wow.
And it's not for lack of other kinds of human relationships.
Does it have anything to do with trauma, abuse, sexual abuse, rape, anything like that would make you...
Not really,
No.
no. In fact, if it did, we'd have a lot more objective sexuals, because we all...
Okay, so that's the part that I wanted to bring up. So watch the other 2 videos. There's 2 parts of the Tyra segment. It'll give you a lot more insight on the background and the behaviors of Erica Eiffel. But what just happened in that exchange between Tyra Banks and the psychologist is a nice indication of why we do what we do, why you're sitting here in this room taking this course and increasing your education, is because our intuitive ideas about what causes behavior is very, very often incorrect. So Tyra Banks is a highly intelligent individual. If you read up on her history, she is very successful because she knows how to think and knows how to make the moves that she needs to make. So she's a highly intelligent individual. I know sometimes we think no because she's a model, but she's very smart. Her mind, she's not a psychologist. Her mind immediately went to that kind of intuitive explanation. Was it some sort of trauma? Was it some sort of sexual abuse as a child? Did something happen to her that made her swear off humans, but she still needed contact, so she went with inanimate objects? Was it something like that? And that's where an intuitive mind, a highly educated, smart, intuitive mind will go. And as the psychologist said, no, that is not the case. And if it was, we would have more than 200 or so of these objectum sexuals in the world. And if it was the case, when you looked at those 200, you would find a very, very high rate of abuse. You need to find it in about 100% of them, and that's just not the case. So as psychologists, we want to understand human behavior. Even very rare behavior like objective sexuals can cast light and insight into all of human behavior. And we do want to explain and understand everything, but always, always remember that your intuitive mind thinks in a certain way that is not necessarily psychological truth. And this is a great example of it, because again, Tyra Banks immediately went to that intuitive, it has to have been some sort of trauma. Behavior this out there could only come from some sort of massive, incident. And the psychologist is like, no, I've looked into it and no. So anyways, we're going to, when next we meet, we're going to answer the question of Erica Eiffel. We got a bunch of stuff to do, but also remember that we are going to have a catch-up, the final catch-up special online-only class is going to be posted this Friday. So it is a separate subject. It's going to be on activity anorexia. So you don't need to watch it before class on Tuesday, but definitely before the exam. It's the last one that we need to catch up for my medical leave. Other than that, if there's nope, I think we're all good. That is it for today. Yes. No. Jog my memory, I might have. I checked some of my messages. No, I did not get that. Okay, yeah.